Hey everyone, it's Types, joined by Uncommon Fossil. As always, we are the Reasonably Effective Podcast, the podcast that brings you reasonable content, hopefully. Today, we are doing something a little different. We're going to be, it's not that different, I guess. We're just kind of rambling on about stuff, but we're talking about what makes decks fun. But first, let's talk quickly, I guess, about live and like any new experiences you've had with Pokemon this week.
Yeah, it's been not a kind of a bland week for me in live. I've been working through all the starter decks, which we had talked about last week. I had started doing that, and I gave like at least a full day to every starter deck just to get a sense of it, which I wanted to do just to understand it, see what's out there for options. And some of them I enjoyed, like Arcanine EX. A lot of them are meh decks, would not make the fun deck list that we would consider. One thing I did notice though, in terms of the ranking, when you get up to I think 600, your player rank, that's when you start the Great League. So at Poke League, you get 20 per win and you lose 10 per loss. So it's pretty easy to move up even with a mediocre deck. But then at Great League, it's kind of they're 500-ish these starter decks because you up 20, down 20. I don't think you can ever fall below 600. I'm not sure. But that is kind of that zone 600-700 is filled with all the starter decks. It seems like occasionally you get a better deck, but all the starter deck people seem to be stuck in this zone of just about 600.
Yeah, that's fair. So yeah, I've honestly been like I've been working on like a bunch of different things. But so I was working on I was just like playing some decks, and I was like I'd run a deck and then I'd like completely brick, and so I'd been like honestly having a really brutal time with Pokemon this week. Like I'd say half my games have just been complete dead draws, which is just unfortunate. Sometimes you have weeks like that.
Yeah.
And then I'm working on my random deck format as well, which should be up by the time this podcast comes out. But I had to do some programming for that, and I wasn't really familiar with the language, and it was just kind of unpleasant. I did get through it. I finally got it done, but yeah, it was kind of frustrating. Oh, and then obviously, so with working on the random deck format, I was messing around with live because the idea is that you import, it makes a deck list, you import it into live.
Yeah.
And I found out some interesting glitches. I'm not actually on live right now because, as I said, we're talking about fun decks, so I wanted to be on PTCG for that one. So a few glitches, I guess. The one is obviously you can import a deck. You can import a deck with more than 4 of a certain card. So in live or in PTCGO, you can't add more than 4 of, say, like a Pikachu. But in live, you can import 6 of that Pikachu, and it will import. You can't play this, I don't believe, but that's a minor glitch. And the only way you can do that is by importing it. You can't, as I said, add it. And then also there's a glitch, I believe, where you have a deck and you like click on the card, and then you can it gives like a plus or minus. We can add a card or delete a card or whatever. Yep. And then you can click on that, and then you can delete the deck, and then you can add cards to the deck, and then it like undeletes the deck. It's very strange. Yeah, I don't know. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, and the deck builder, I mean, obviously live needs work, and the deck builder certainly is one of the weaker parts still, I think, in live. It's okay, but it's not as good as PTCGO.
Yeah, and PTCGO isn't great, but yeah, live's just pretty annoying. You can't import decks of over a certain size. I'm not sure what the size was. I was testing, as I said, my deck had my random deck generator, and it definitely ran into that problem. The deck I was trying to import wasn't like a legal deck, obviously, if it was too big. But
just on that issue, because I was putting together my deck of want list for Scarlet and Violet, and I think it capped out at either 75 or 76 cards.
Okay, that's
and then you couldn't add to it anymore. I think in some ways that might be a good thing. Obviously, it's not a legal deck. You could have bigger decks than that in PTCGO. Like when I was going through looking at ideas for like a deck, like I want to like a Evolution Fire deck, and I'm just grabbing all these cards for it, and I end up with like 100 cards. But on PTCGO, when you have like 100 cards, the whole program would bog down. So it might be just to avoid those issues that they capped it.
Yeah, it's certainly fine. Like you can't even see the cards anyway. Like on PTCGO, you can see most of the cards and like look through them, and then you can kind of make decisions. And that's not what Live's meant to do. So it's fine that you can't add that many.
Yep.
I mean, it would be nice if it worked better, but you know, it is what it is. It wasn't awful, but I'm wondering if there are other glitches in there. I'm sure there are.
Yeah, and the formatting's different for importing, right? Because if you exported a list from PTCGO, when you go to import it to live, it usually doesn't work. And if there's even
Yeah.
one card that it doesn't like the formatting of in live, it just rejects the deck list. It won't impart like the 59 cards it knows. You can't and just add the one. You have to then manually enter all 60, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate.
And also it doesn't swap in arts like ever, I don't think, which is kind of annoying. And also you can there's another issue. You're saying that what was the thing you just said?
Um, oh, about importing deck lists. First, the format's different between live and PTCGO for some of the syntax, and then if it has a card, even one card doesn't like it, just won't import the deck list.
Yeah, I think actually the only thing it looks for is the I'm not sure about this, but I think the only thing it looks for is the set number and symbol. Which means that you can like spell the Pokemon name wrong, I think, and should still work.
Okay.
I'm not actually sure about that. Also, you need like enter because I was using JavaScript, but you need \n before and after the list.
Mm,
Um, for some reason, otherwise it like doesn't take the card. I don't know what that was all about, but
okay.
yeah, it's kind of weird there.
Yeah, I mean, some of it obviously it's touchy because even like Pokemon Card.io that we both use some or have used, it gets like fussy about things and has some weird glitchiness to it at times. So it's a little odd that they changed the syntax between the two things. And as far as I know, it's never been published what the syntax should be from Pokemon's perspective.
Yeah, but it's not awful. But I think it's time to, as
Yep.
I said, talk about fun decks and what makes a deck fun and decks that we've enjoyed and decks we haven't enjoyed. And I'll kick it off, I
Yeah.
guess, with one that's not actually in standard, but I think you have some thoughts about it, and we both played this
Okay.
deck a lot, and we enjoyed it. But I think I've actually started to enjoy it less. That's
Hmm.
Band Party,
Okay.
right? And you played that deck a lot.
Yeah, I played it a lot. I mean, when I started back on PTCGO, that was kind of the new set at the time. So I pulled a lot of cards, and obviously it was very affordable to a new player to get, and it was a solid deck. And yeah, I liked it, and I played it a decent amount and expanded too, because it was a good expanded deck that was also affordable. Whereas a lot of those get pricey, but it's a deck I like, and I think a lot of people like it. You know, from what I can tell with other videos and stuff, it's just part of it is I think you have this 40 HP Pokemon in Bunnelby that can do big damage, so that's always fun when you can do stuff like that. Single prize decks are just that's always fun because obviously multi-prize things tend to dominate. So when you get a single prize deck that can compete with it, it's fun also. Um, and the decks that work a little different are always enjoyable. So this one, you're damage based on cards in the discard pile, which isn't the norm for most decks. So those are some of the things I think that makes it fun.
Yeah, I agree with all those. One of the things is also, for those who know, the Pachirisu story in the video game world where it won the world championships. It's like any Pokemon, even if it's like a small Pokemon, can win. Um, and then also the idea that it also has some nostalgia, Bumblebee, as
Mhm.
it's like the Nightmare style deck.
Right.
I don't know if that's a big deal, but I think some people certainly really find are like attached to that. Um, Honestly, though, the more I played it, the less I've enjoyed it. I think, and this is a really big factor. I think when something's new, you enjoy it more. So we are both relatively new to the more serious side of the TCG. So
Yeah.
then it was like much more interesting, even though like a lot of things we were doing were pretty generic. Um, and then the idea is like the deck obviously you get lots of Pokemon in the discard. It's really annoying and it can be countered pretty easily though. Spread's super awful for it. So I think and then there are other things. Notably, I think it's best in expanded format, and
Hmm.
I play that like a lot. It's my go-to expanded deck. Um, and honestly, it's only fun when you win, because in expanded because either you completely dominate or you completely get like shut down. In expanded, it was more balanced, but
Hmm.
it still honestly felt a lot like that a lot of the time where you were completely dominant or completely lost in the game. So I don't know. I don't. I think the deck's cool, but I don't think it's inherently an interesting deck. You mentioned like a few points that like kind of make it cool, but I don't think it stands out
Hmm.
as a great one of like the great fun decks in my opinion.
No, although as we're talking about it, there's a build you had that was also fun and kind of led to some other ideas, and that's with the B drill. That it was the last card in hand, you could play it down, right? And you
Yeah.
drew what you drew three cards, I think, with it.
Yeah. So I'll pull it. Where is it? I called it Mad.
Yeah, Mad
Yeah,
drill, I
Madrill.
think.
So I had a deck called Bad Drill, which was bad, obviously. The idea is that you have the single prize B drill, um, and from Vivid Voltage, if it's the last card in your hand, you can play it down, draw 3 cards. Same ability as Greninja GX from I want to say Hidden Fates, Detective Pikachu, some like mini set, I think.
Okay.
Which is kind of cool, but then that was like awful. But then Madrill is like bad drill, but with Mad Party, and it was kind of interesting because you have ideas where you discard with Glare and Meowth to thin your hand, then
Hmm.
draw more with Beedrill. It's a single prize draw engine, combos with Soup Up Net, and
Right.
part of why that deck's fun is that it's very different in the fact that you have this like different condition that you're going for that no other deck really likes. We want to get no cards in hand. We've actually seen a few cards in decks like this. We've seen
Hmm.
Mustard. Both the Mustards want this. We've seen there's an Empoleon that wants this. There's also the Hisuian Arcanine, which
Hmm.
wants this. Although that's not exactly the same, but I think the idea of like doing these weird, not necessarily win conditions, but conditions to do something makes
Hmm.
the card really fun when you're like just doing something different and silly.
Right. It was the B drill. You had the glaring Meowth, and then there was also was it a psychic Pokemon that could discard three at one point in time.
Dusknoir, yeah.
So you had these options to discard to get down to the zero card hand, which obviously paired with the Mad Party. So it and it was all kind of an alternative to the Dedenne GX, which is obviously a tremendous card. Everybody played it. You could get a deck that was almost as effective as the Dedenne GX while using these rogue cheap Pokemon, which makes it more fun, I think. Right? If you can get close to the same win rate with something that's a little bit out there, it's enjoyable.
Hmm. Yeah. Also, I'd say I kind of enjoy turbo style decks.
Mm.
Like notably Dedenne GX or some of those silly expanded decks. Although I never played with Shaman EX, I don't think. But
Hmm.
uh, like drawing your whole deck turn one's kind of fun.
Yeah.
We see that with UV Max, where it's just fun to just play all your cards. But then that also can get kind of boring. It's only fun when you draw your whole deck and then win. So that's why a deck like even Donkin expanded
Hmm.
can be fun because it's just stupid. But then as soon as you lose, it just feels awful. So I feel like decks like that, well, they can be fun. Sometimes they're not a fun deck in general. And also they're not fun to play against because it's not very thoughtful. It's either they do get their combo off or they don't, or you have counters or they just whiff or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a question of what is it fun or a deck that could be effective, but like with those deck that set up quickly, playing the Reshazard back with Welder, right? Reshiram and Charizard, you had the potential. You were doing, I think, 200 damage turn one, which could just put your opponent in such a bad spot. Then you could do 230 the next turn, and your opponent was, by the end of even turn one off, and your opponent had almost lost the game. And by turn two, they're definitely out of contention. So it can be fun, but it gets tiring playing those decks after a while. I think they are high
Yeah.
roll, which they have to be, right? If they're
Yeah,
not
I
high,
just no,
high.
or for me it's a bit different. I just hate like I'm just too good at Pokemon. It's so brutal.
Yeah. So, but as you're saying, those decks that are different, I think, is a big part of what's fun. So, like for me, it was never a good deck, but I always wanted it to work, and I had fun messing with it. The cast form deck, and you've made fun of me for that, right? But it's a
Yeah.
Pokemon. It can attack with that energy, right? Which is just a fun thing, right? It's a single prizer, so you can take a few knockouts and get behind and still come back. So an idea like that, right? The idea I can build a deck, 60 card deck with no energy and can still start doing. If I could start doing 150 damage by turn two or three, that's not bad at all. So it's kind of fun when you can win with a deck that's just doing something a little weird like that.
Yeah, and you also enjoy Rotom V, which is kind of a similar idea where you
Yep.
have lots of these cards that
Hmm.
like provide And I guess I'm probably in the same sense. These cards that don't necessarily provide a ton of value to your deck, you just
Hmm.
have kind of stuck in there. Even decks like, um, I don't know any deck that plays like absurd amounts of energy. I think that
Yeah.
these ideas where the deck plays these like weird cards seems kind of interesting. Although
Hmm.
they honestly like don't work either usually.
Right. I mean, they're kind of fun and they're really enjoyable when it works, but they don't work. I mean, Rotom V actually wasn't a bad deck, but obviously you'd put in this absurd amount of tools in the deck to make it work. But there are, even to the extent it worked, there are much better decks out there to choose from. So part of the fun was just it was a different type of deck to make it. That's what gave it value. Um, Another deck that I like that's just different, and this is a super high roll deck, and I know you hated it. I think it was the Maractus deck with the coin flip, right? With just an
It was
absurd.
kind of fun. It was silly. I think these are um with Cham or Porygon Z. I describe them as YouTube decks where you
Yeah.
just they make really good videos and that you know that the person's like almost definitely gonna like completely obliterate their opponent or something like absurd is gonna happen. I think there's the moderately iconic moment of Andrew Mahone flipping like almost all tails off of like 10 coin flips with
Yeah.
Maractus. They're fun to watch, but they're not necessarily fun to play because most of your games you won't get set up. But when it sets up, it's fun.
Yeah. I mean,
But yeah, they're good like a tenth of the time, and for YouTube that's good enough.
but even for playing, I would enjoy playing because honestly, at the time with a good build, you would win above 30% of the time. You know, maybe 40%, which isn't terrible. But then you got the game. But every 1/4 of the time, you're one shotting someone's VMAX. You're like, it just feels so good, right? But um, it's fun. It's like dumb fun though, right? Because it's not a good deck. You're just kind of enjoying the kind of meme factor to it.
Yeah, and I think there's only so much fun that can be had with those decks. I personally, I think the more I've developed as a player, the more I've enjoyed more strategic like style plays and
Hmm.
also like combos as well. I enjoy combo decks. Um, I'll say I enjoy a lot of different styles of decks, but I think some combo decks are really cool. There's a dark deck where you had Greninja Zorak GX. You use that attack. This is essentially Lugia Archeops, but bad. You accelerate, use your GX attack to put Incineroar GXs onto the bench to like accelerate energy to them, and then you do lots of damage with your Greninja and Zorak. That was kind of fun.
Hmm.
Even like the infinite I think it was Weavile GX that turned this VMAX, Darkrai GX, Kecleon combo where you shrunk and expanded your bench
Hmm.
using Weavile GX to move the energy off and on of your Kecleon, which turns Dark type when it has Dark energy attached, allowing you to bring Darkrai on and off your bench, and then you move the energy, and then Darkrai accelerates to itself and moves the energy off. And then you can like get all your energies. Do you remember that deck?
I never played it, but I think I was up against it some, and it wasn't. It's not enjoyable to be just sitting there watching your opponent take this almost infinitely long turn, just waiting to lose the game.
Yeah, I feel like expanded format's just kind of bad. Um, the decks there are a lot of like absurd combo decks. And then there are like lots of control decks. And I think we should probably talk about control, right?
Um, yeah, I mean, control can be. It obviously can be not fun to play against, right? Because you end up not doing much. But it's certainly the ability to stop your opponent from doing what they want it's always brings a certain amount of joy. I find. I think to many people it's a fun thing to do.
Yeah, that's not obviously not something like good for the game if you're just like torturing your opponent. I think a fun deck needs to be fun for both players. I'd argue though that control can be interesting to play against and fun to play against if it's very thoughtful. Um, both players need to be pretty good, I'd say.
Hmm.
And also need to certain types of control. For example, like hand lock control decks like X control, I just really don't like because they're just you just lose. Like all of a sudden you can't play any cards, which isn't interesting when you don't have any options. Um, versus
Yeah.
a deck like Mewtwo control can be super obnoxious to play against as well. But then like a lot of newer builds of control aren't just one strategy. The idea is that both players need to manage their resources accurately and play just to the best of their ability, and then the better player comes out on top. Um, And I think I like the idea of that where you need to play your best.
Hmm.
And then I think that's kind of cool. Or I definitely don't enjoy, and you don't enjoy playing control either, do you?
No, and I haven't done it a lot, so I'm not good at it, right? It's you have to obviously know your 60, and that's not the
Eh,
hardest. Well,
eh.
but that's not the hardest part. But then you also need to know your opponent's 60, and you need to know their 60 from just seeing a few cards, right? To figure out what your strategy is, at least to play it at a high level. So,
Yeah.
I certainly control. It's not exactly control, but I certainly enjoy mill decks. Now that's less skill based, and you don't like mill. I don't think you don't respect it a lot, but it's fun watching it just discarding your opponent's cards, watching them lose the pieces that they're going to need to make the game work. And obviously, there's cards like Glare and Wheezing that are shutting you down your opponent. It's certainly a control aspect within things like that.
Yeah, the thing with mill that I don't like is it feels very random. Like it just depends a lot on how your opponent uh like what cards you hit with your opponent. If you hit switches, you just kind of win. If you or energies, you can just kind of win. If you don't, you can just kind of lose. Also, I think the best control deck or the best mill deck by far has been Durant since I've been
Hmm.
like playing, and I started like even when I first joined the game ever, which was during the black and white era, Durant was like a deck, and I came back and it's still a deck. So I can't think of any other good mill decks. I mean, there's Bulbin Bryson Man mill, which is kind of mill, but it's also
Hmm.
like control. So um, yeah, I feel like Durant mill is just not fun to play against, or it's just not an interesting deck because like half your game, like you'll see that like your Durants are just all prized sometimes,
Hmm.
and that's just kind of annoying. Yeah, I don't think it's. I'm not a big fan of Durant Mill, which is the mill deck you're talking about, right?
It's been the most effective for sure. So yeah, now one of the things you like is I think a deck with a lot of decisions, which I do like, but I think there's also a place where I enjoy it. I don't know if it's the same as having fun. That is enjoyment, having fun, the same thing. But a simple deck, there's times it's nice to play a deck where the game's more low key, and I'm not making like three critical decisions every turn and stuff. I just make a few decisions over the course of the game and kind of sit back and let it play out. And obviously, like Durant Mill's one of those, and there's a number of decks like that have worked like that I enjoy for that reason. Like even an Eternus deck back in the day, it was an effective deck, but it was pretty linear. You knew what to do. A deck like Ice Rider and Talion, which generally set itself up pretty straightforward to play. It was more of was your opponent's deck better than yours, which it was a lot of times. A few decisions that could possibly swing the game, but a lot of it you just kind of sit back, make your plays, kind of just to enjoy the time.
Yeah, I definitely see. There are some decks like that that I just despise. I think Ice Rider is fine. It's a straightforward deck. But I don't like. Um, so you Victini V Max, which is just a four for Victini.
Yeah.
Or maybe 4/3, and then there are other some decks like Stonejourner and Dracozolt, and I just despise those decks. They're like the worst thing in the world to play against. You just sit there, your opponent does the same thing every turn, and you know exactly what they're gonna do, and you just know that you're probably gonna lose, or that you
Yeah.
just dominate them. And neither of them are very interesting. I'd say that those decks are completely brain dead. Honestly, I just despise them. They're so not fun to play against. And they're just healing a lot. The Victini build doesn't heal, but it's super annoying still. Um, and I'd define them as anti-creativity decks. I don't like them at all. There actually was a Stonejourner build where you had, um, I think you had some other options, but not too many
Hmm.
other options. And there was also some Victini builds that had other options, but just straight Victini. If you just play a 4/4 VMAX in that, oh, okay. So I played Metagross Control, right?
Yes.
Um,
Which.
and I enjoy that. And I think that deck's more interesting because honestly, it's weaker. It also has like control aspects. But honestly, I imagine if I had seen that more, I would have liked it less. It's very toxic as well. I say not as toxic. You do have more choices as well. With your first attack, you are choosing what cards to get.
Hmm.
Versus Stonejourner, Dracozolt, Victini, you're just using your attack every turn, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Those simple kind of decks can be boring. Although, like a simple in that certain vein, I'd say Corviknight VMAX was a similar deck that I kind of happen to enjoy at times too, where it's got free retreat off the VMAX, and you could get healing going with the deck, and you just kind of get four in play, and you just move between them one by one, heal them off with with your Crystal Cave or something, and by the time that it gets back into it, it should be healed up again, and you're kind of doing a little bit of damage. You're not doing a lot. You don't worry about it. You just kind of sit there and just take your time. And I
Yeah,
could
with that,
enjoy something like that.
yeah, with that deck, there's also the idea that you can use Memory Capsule
Yeah,
and the first attack to stop him from retreating, and you can
right.
also stick double turbo energies on to do no damage and get something trapped forever,
Hmm.
which is kind of interesting. Did you play it like that? Where you try to trap something?
Yeah, I definitely did do memory capsule with that deck. Probably one of the few times that memory capsule might actually work. My experiences with that have not been good. Just that it's just too high roll generally. Um,
Yeah.
but again, it's just a kind of a relax, a deck. Yeah, you kind of sit back, you let it do its thing. But again, you don't want to do those games. There's just certain days that that type of game is enjoyable.
Yeah,
Um,
you'll start your game of Pokemon and then like start your YouTube video, like watching a YouTube video, and
yes.
then like you look up and it's like, oh, the time's run out. Guess I'll make my move now. And then you like make a few moves, and then you like go back to watching a video, and then you look up, oh, they played Escape Row, and then you send off your Pokemon, and then you look back down at like your phone or whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to do because it's try not to do it, and it's really horrible to play against those people, and most people are guilty of that some, but when you have your opponent that like every simple decision they're making, they take most of their time. You can tell they're either just trying to annoy you or they just don't really care about the game.
Yeah, I mean it's the live experience. Well, what can I say?
Well, it happened in PTCG also, I gotta say. So
Yeah, no, I usually try to play pretty quickly, even if I am not paying attention. I just make like bad plays.
yeah. All right, so I'm going to bring up a deck here that you're not going to like, but I like it, and I know you hate it, and that's Rapid Strike Malamar, which gets into the idea. It's a single prize deck. It's a stage one, so pretty easy to set up. One energy. Um, the idea is you have a single prize Pokemon attacking one energy, but can do very big damage. The potential certainly to knock out like a V Pokemon, and even can as the game gets, if you're set up right, take out even a V Max in one shot. So just a very fun feeling to me. And obviously, as a single prize deck, you can whiff a couple turns along the way and know you have a chance still, which is probably another factor too. Decks that you have the chance to come back, I think, are fun too.
Yeah, I definitely enjoy that. The decks that come back. I don't enjoy
Don't
Malamar.
like Malamar, yeah.
So give me one like one like why do you like Malamar though?
I like
Uh,
it in that it's a deck that, like your first, honestly, you can take a couple turns to set up, and it doesn't matter what your opponent does. It doesn't matter like you're getting behind because you've got the
doesn't matter
potential.
what that your opponent like goes in with their Urshifu Dragapult and KOs all your EKs and Malamars or all your
Well,
Grimmerades.
that was a problem. Although you seem to hit matchup against Dragapult a lot more than I did. Um, so yes, but what I'll say though is, and if you're taking it to like a tournament and worried about things like that, that's a problem. But when just going on the ladder, you just kind of don't worry about. If you 10% of the time you just hit an unwinnable matchup, that's kind of true for every game. You just don't worry about it. So I don't think that was the biggest thing.
Yeah, it was more like 50, 60, 70% of the
Wow.
time you'd like hit an unwinnable matchup.
I think that was your experience. That wasn't my experience. But we all have decks that just seem to work and not work. But and I liked the Chinchino build back in the day, and I guess it'd be Curlia now. But um, because that deck builds over time. With the Inteleon build, you actually would start really strong. Maybe it was a better deck competitively, but then as the game went on, you were using up your nets and stuff, and the deck actually worked less well. Whereas Chinchino, you start to fill up with Chinchinos, you're drawing more and more cards, and you can waste a turn or two it's okay because I can just get like 2 or 3 turn prizes late in the game, and I like that. I like having the option to know that things are okay. It's okay. I have a bad
Things are
turn.
not okay when you're playing Malamar.
Another deck that I keep that gives me a similar feeling as I think
No,
about it.
we need to talk about Malamar.
All right,
Yeah.
I figured you wanted to move on. So,
No, no, no. I need to. Malamar is like it's 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 just so awful. It's just so to me, it's a very boring deck. You just do the same thing over and over. You just like
mhm.
you draw cards and then you like since you know an artillery, and then you attack and then you do that again every turn, every game. It has like no versatility. And also it's like it feels so vulnerable. You need so much setup. And to me, like when I compare it to deck like Mad Party, it's just a worse version of Mad Party. It's an evolution. You can honestly compare it to a deck like Baby Blacephalon, which
Mhm.
also has combos. It's more interesting, Baby Blacephalon as well. But even if you're playing a very boring build, you'd still be able to attack from nothing. So Malamar, you just kind of already know that. Like when you look at your board and you see you don't have any attackers in play for next turn, you
Yeah.
just kind of know that it's not good.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, like against like Urshifu, you had to know it was a possibility. So then at times might have to overplay your Inkays, which then makes the game tougher for you.
You
But
know, you play like then they just KO all your like auxiliaries, and then you look at your bench and it's just like Inke, and then you're like, this still isn't good. Or they go ahead and then they meta sham, and then they KO both your other Inkes, and then you know
it's a bad. I agree that
it's a
was
bad deck,
part
unfortunately.
rough. I think part of what you don't like about it is you only have one attacker, and that's
Yeah,
Malamar. And pretty much with the deck, you didn't play gusting. Like you needed to either like research or Bruno or Cynthia's ambition every turn. So you never were you couldn't play boss, right? Maybe you could play like Pokemon catcher, but
yeah,
that's a pretty iffy card there. So
yeah,
you had one card to attack with. It did one attack, and you're only hitting into your opponent's active. So that turn was very linear. But honestly, to me, I want to maximize the current turn, and I'm thinking ahead to my next turn, and I'm not really thinking much beyond that. So a deck like that's what you're doing. It's okay. This turn, can I get the damage I need for the knockout? How can I set up my next turn so I'm guaranteed to attack and give myself the best chance to do big damage? And I like
yeah.
that about it.
Yeah, I guess I should share my Malamar story as well. So I was like, it was Malamar came out in like Chilling Reign, and so
Hmm.
people played it, and then people like stopped playing it. And I played it a few times when it came out, and a few sets after. I like gave up because it's kind of bad. And so I was like, you know what? I think it was like Astral Radiance came out, and people are playing it a little more, and I was like, I'll go try it out. And I think I've said this before, but I went to Limitless, looked at the top deck list like you do, and then I
Hmm.
copied it. And it was an Irida list because, Irida is a new card. People wanted to throw in a new card. Kind of makes sense. You have some water Pokemon,
Hmm.
and a Shizuan item's good. And also
Yeah.
played Chinchino, right? Because,
Hmm.
you like Chinchino.
I
Um,
do.
but then like Irida and Chinchito don't have like the idea of with Irida is that you can search out your Inteleons, and it just ran like Octilius, the only water Pokemon. It was just awful. Like you'd use your supporter, and then you draw your hand, and then you just see like Irida, Chichium, and Chino, and just have like no Rapid Strike Pokemon in hand. And then I just gave up on the deck forever.
Well, yeah. See, the Irida doesn't make sense with that. I gotta say, as I'm
There's the
looking,
top list. There's the top list. It's the best
yeah.
Malwars to get in.
Well, the top list is always a deck is probably a bit of a high roll list, right? And it worked for one person in one event. So I,
I don't know.
as I'm looking at it, here's the other thing that I liked about it is Rapid Strike Tentacles. It's 40 per Rapid Strike card. So as the game went on, you would get to the small deck, and it was all Rapid Strike cards. So you were just doing. It was just so concentrated to do big damage if you developed the game if you developed things right over the course of the game. You became almost unstoppable if you could survive enough turns with the deck. That's kind of how I felt with it.
Yeah.
So you couldn't survive enough turns. So that I think that might be on you.
No, it's the deck's just bad. I'm a good player. The deck's just not good.
All right. Well, it was better than cast form, and I'm going to throw out another deck I liked. So another idea I liked. It was garbage and then some. But that's the Kecleon. Was it right with the
The top keck.
The one that with the chroma shift, right?
Yeah. With which build was this? Was this the Sylveon deck?
No, with Kecleon with the I guess it probably cheer 'em and such. It would match the type of the opponents of whatever basic energy it had, and then with super effective glasses, I
Oh,
think, or goggles, whichever one it
yeah.
was, right? So it would do triple damage. You hit every type for weakness, obviously except for dragon, right? But so
Yeah.
this idea, an absurd, stupid deck, and there's just nothing that would work. So it does 90 damage for 3 if you could get them on. So now you're doing 270 off this little dumb basic single prize Pokemon, right? So a deck like that is fun to me if it can get going. But that's kind of garbage too. I gotta say.
Yeah, Kecleon wasn't very good. And then I think we should talk about, I don't think it was that fun. I think
All right.
like it was kind of it's one of those decks that's like bad, funny once in a while, but not that good. And
Mm-hmm.
then speaking of one of those like content creator decks, the Sylveon Kecleon deck, Sylveon VMAX does more damage for each type of Pokemon
Mm.
you have on your
Oh
bench.
yeah, yeah.
Or and then you could stick like a bunch of different types of energy onto Kecleon and
Mm-hmm.
actually have your full bench. You can have like all the types of Pokemon on your bench, and then yeah,
Yes.
that was kind of funny. I don't think that ever worked, but it's like
It could
actually
work
it's a funny
occasionally,
idea.
but yeah, it wasn't the best way to play Sylveon.
Nah,
And not that Sylveon was ever great anyway, although I enjoyed.
Sylveon was pretty good. Arceus Sylveon was good, and Sylveon when it came out was very solid as well.
Yeah, yeah, it had its time. Let me bring up something with the fun and the idea of winning. Right, to me, the deck needs to be have some level of success. Right, to be fun, it's not fun just to sit down and lose all the time. It's not necessarily fun to play the top deck that you just feel like you have the advantage all the time, but you need to have a viable deck, I guess, to make it fun. What
Y-
do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends. If a deck has like quote unquote natural fun, where the general ideas of the deck are more interesting, you can afford the deck to be worse. Um, but I feel like I definitely think it depends on what you're against as well. There are lots of like sometimes the top deck can be very oppressive, especially if it's spread. I'd say a lot of like fun decks tend to be single prizes as well.
Hmm.
Um, most of the ones we've talked about have been single prizes, I think, and
Yeah.
they're more interest. They're just more single prize Pokemon, so they're naturally more interesting. Um, yeah, I feel like the idea of like a deck being fun versus good. I think winning is generally fun. I
Hmm.
can't think of too many times when I win a game and I'm like, that was awful. I've had all sorts of games. There was a game I played a best of 3 against someone in a tournament, untimed against a control player. It lasted 3 hours, but I won and it was still fun.
Okay.
If I had lost, it probably would have been not fun. But I feel like yeah, pretty much winning is always fun unless you just completely sweep or you but it's usually fine. Um like even had games where I just donked my opponent and won, or that's kind of fun too. But then losing, it
Hmm.
doesn't always feel bad, but I'd say around half the time losing feels bad. Um and that's just not fun. So I think you need I don't know. I honestly, I'm not exactly sure what makes a loss fun. Obviously, back and forth play is interesting.
Hmm.
Sometimes also if your opponent is running something really cool, that can be fun as well.
Yeah, or knowing that obviously when you're playing a deck that's a rogue deck and playing up against a deck that should beat you and making it close is good. When you're up against the deck that hits you for weakness and you manage to almost get there, right? If you could have hit boss the last turn, you would have won. And but knowing that just getting you probably played a really good game to get to that point.
I don't know. I feel like those games still aren't that interesting. Like theoretically, this should be cool. And I get your logic, but
Mhm.
I feel like you just lost. And I think if you have a game where you just don't really have a shot, it's still not fun, even if you are able to make it close. Because I just like I just I just like winning, and I think most players do as well. And because most players like winning, they play top decks, and that becomes very like toxic. This idea of like winning, that's why you see people just being like super toxic on ladder as well.
Mhm.
And what I've said previously that I think a ranked ladder existing makes the game more toxic. I don't think most players care too much about their rank, but they care some, and when something's on the line at all, people just become toxic.
Yeah, but I'm going to challenge you on this because while winning's fun, as you say, you don't like most of the top decks. You don't find them to be fun decks usually, right? Partly because
Well,
they're played too much.
you're not winning all your games anyway. You're even if you're playing the best deck in the game, you're probably only winning half your deck matches anyways. And then the decks are still not fun. That's not true that all the top decks aren't fun. It depends. So let's see the top decks right now. So,
Hmm.
um, you got something like Lost Zone. That's a pretty fun deck, I think. Um,
Hmm.
because as versatility, when in my opinion, a fun deck has versatility, various options, and
Hmm.
comeback potential, power, obviously, all those different things. And I think Lost Zone hits all the boxes for that. Pretty much any build of Lost Zone is kind of cool. Unless you're going super generic. I'm personally not a huge fan of like Gudra Lost Zone, but even that's kind of cool. Um, and then, and what you do you enjoy Lost Zone, right? You've played that, I'm
Yeah,
assuming.
I do enjoy it, and obviously it's you're making a lot of important decisions, so it's very much a thinking deck, which is important. It
Yeah.
does often. Usually has some ability to come back depending on the build, what the path is, but usually you can come back with that deck too, which is nice.
And also, it's a single price deck. It's the
Hmm.
best single price deck we've had in quite a while, I think. I can't think of
Yeah,
any other single price deck like that's been good, like amazing. Reggies have been good. So I
yeah.
don't love
Reggie's would be good.
Reggies.
Yeah,
They're just not strong enough. Like you just kind of lose a lot of. I never was really just a big fan of the deck in terms of how good it was. Um, the like you like Reggies, right?
not that much actually. I mean, it's nice in that it's a single prize deck, and it can hit a lot of decks for weakness, but it's a deck that's really high roll. And you either like by turn two you're set up and you're in great shape, or you're just it didn't set up and you're going to lose. And I don't enjoy decks like that. I like things that are either that are more consistent and such. Than at the end of turn one or turn two, it's like, oh, I didn't get my turn one Archeops on the bench. Now I'm going to lose. Oh, I got my Archeops set up on the bench. I'm going to win now. I don't find that enjoyable.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, I just didn't like the Lugia Archeops build. I still don't like it. I think it's a bit more interesting, but also because it's weaker and it's more fun to play against.
Hmm.
But I think that's a big idea, where like if you whiff turn one and you're out of the game, that feels bad. In that same sense, I played the Gardevoir EX deck some, and I'm not a big fan of it, honestly, because it feels like you don't set up very well. Like you set up slower,
Hmm.
and then you just kind of lose. It's a bit of a weird deck to play, and I'm not used to it. But I'm not a huge fan of that because it seems kind of high roll. You can play it slower, and maybe that's like the idea where it's just better. But I'm just not a huge fan of the
Hmm.
deck. Um, it's cool though. I like the idea of it in the game, and I'm happy that I think some people enjoy it a lot. So it's nice it's there. Uh, I don't think it has qualities that make it like inherently a not fun deck, but and then other top decks right now. I mean, I think Arceus is kind of cool, right? I haven't actually
Hmm.
played Arceus post rotation, but and you enjoy Arceus a lot as well, right?
Yeah, it gives a nice flexibility. There were obviously I haven't played it post rotation either, but obviously it's still flexible because it can pair with any other V. So it gives you options. It has the inherent its own draw, so you can get yourself set up quite often, which is nice. A deck that has the ability to set up, and then you have different partners, so you can change the deck as you want. And also when you're playing against it, it's kind of nice not knowing what their 60 are. Right, if you until you see their basic energy against Arceus, there's a lot of things you could be up against. You're not sure what to do, and I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think Arceus is like a cool deck. Honestly, it did feel little bit oppressive when it came out, but
Hmm.
I think since then it's toned down. And yeah, I think that's it. Honestly, do you have any other like standard decks you want to talk about?
I mean, right? I mean, a couple of decks that I've enjoyed that I don't think you've enjoyed amongst the multi-prize attackers. One was Delmai's VMAX, that obviously is rotated now, but the idea of taking a second or third tier Pokemon and making it at least a moderately viable deck, and that's probably the best it was. It had a different attack. The swinging chain could as you powered it up could do big damage to the bench, which most decks can't. So I like that about it, and I liked say the Entei V. I always kept trying to get that to work because I kind of enjoy fire. And again, it was kind of like the bad version of Suicune V, But with Magna Base, it's just tantalizing that it seems like it could work. So just trying to make those things work is also enjoyable.
Yeah, I guess I like the idea of that as well. But then I think some other decks I enjoy
Hmm.
that I forgot about actually. One was Decidueye, which I played during the Pog Champ
Yep.
tournament. The second one, honestly, I like that because it just won like all the time.
Hmm.
You'd hit like auto win after auto win after auto win. So pretty much you just win all your games,
Yep.
and that's fun. It wasn't even that interesting of a deck to play, but it was so easy, and you'd have so many free matchups that was nice.
Hmm.
But then also a different Italian engine. I really enjoy the Italian engine and their various Italian boxes, including
Yep.
the Dark Box deck. This I thought was pretty cool. I like being able to do these interesting combos every turn and having the power to do whatever you want. And Italian engine kind of gives you that. So
Hmm.
I was a big fan of that as well.
Yeah, and thinking of the Decidueye, I think a little after that, the Dark Box came out with a bunch of dark could be single prizers and such with some different ways to play it. So that was that was interesting. It was a little tricky to play, I think. And it was a point. There was a time when it was a strong deck that if you played it right, you could get good results from it. I think you liked that more than I did.
Yeah, I like that deck a lot with there are four attackers, and there's honestly a big debate of like what was the ideal way to play it. And it didn't really matter. But it was Sableye V and
Yeah.
Weezing. That was kind of one package where you
Hmm.
start with Weezing, finish with Sableye, and then the other idea is that you could do Hoopa Moltres.
Yeah.
Um, you start with Hoopa, which is, in my opinion, worse because it doesn't ability lock, and then end with Moltres. Obviously, Weezing's not fun to play against, but a Glam Moltres V, or Baby Glam Moltres, sorry.
Right.
Um, and but then you could kind of stick them all together and end up with like a kind of neat deck with the Italian engine. And it was fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, in decks that are a little bit off are fun. Like you enjoyed, and I've enjoyed playing the Zero Aura Rapid Strike Inteleon deck back when, obviously, before that Inteleons the Drizziles rotated, and if you could just set up, you'd just use Sobble to get some Pokemon on the bench, and then just start switching these Zero Auras in. If it worked, it was very high roll. You were doing good things. Most, of course, a lot of the time it did nothing.
Yeah, and I also I have to say I am a content creator. Truly, I'll just play like a deck a few times, post a video on it, and never touch it again.
Hmm.
And it's like fun those few times, and then just move on. And speaking of moving on, I think it's time we move on to
Okay.
talking about it's still on the topic of fun decks, but of other formats. So I think we should talk about the theme deck format a little, right? Because we both enjoy that, or we did, anyways, enjoy that format a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge, obviously, part of PTCGO. I've migrated, so I cannot play theme anymore. I can't even, yeah, I can't play theme at all. Right? I mean, I could jump in expanded, but you can't even do it against an invitation because you can't invite friends for non-standard decks. So, a couple things that was nice. One, there was a set of decks to choose from, and there were a decent number of choices. I mean, there was many theme decks. A lot of them obviously weren't good, but you had a lot to choose from. You knew more or less what all the builds were that you're going up against. I never memorized the 60, but you knew at least like 50 plus of the cards, right? How many like energy recoveries and stuff might be the question. And the decks are pre-built, so you didn't have to worry about do I have the right 60 in this. So it was a kind of a way it was that to relax when you played Pokemon, right? You knew the deck you were playing, you knew the way most of the matchups would go. Obviously, every game's different because what you draw and what your opponent draws in the moves, but you can kind of be semi on autopilot in play. And there's times when think that's just is fun.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. The format's like pretty chill as well, like as you were talking
Hmm.
about. I think one issue is like the types. Uh, Honestly, type matchups in standard, they're sometimes important, they're sometimes not. In
Hmm.
theme, they can be very important though, because like water and fire are just the dominant types. I think.
Yeah.
There's the Dragonite Soaring Storm deck as well, which is very good.
Hmm.
Um, but I feel like type matchups can completely make certain matchups like unwinnable. So that's not ideal, but
Hmm.
there are definitely times you can overcome it as well. And then I feel like theme's pretty cool, but most of the decks didn't have too much specifically interesting going for them. It's just a good format overall.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the decks were pretty straightforward with what you do. The decks like the water what's the deck with Empoleon, right? Where you
Yeah.
kind of what was that?
Depths or Imperial Command, which one?
The one
Team
the
Depths, I think. That's the main one.
unseen depths where you could choose the attack from the previous evolution. So you had some decision making, and which is good, right? So you're making choices and making the right choices. What certainly would impact how the game went. Some of the decks were much more linear, and it was just did you draw the right cards when you needed it, and then if you did, you won, and if not, you lost. So decks with decision making, made it more enjoyable.
Yeah, and actually, you talking about the Empoleon, that reminds me of something that's I think very important is that we forgot to mention is toolbox style decks.
Mm-hmm.
There is a variety of them. I think the most notable, and actually a World Championship deck, Mewtwo and Mew. You didn't play that much, but I played it a lot, and it was so fun.
Mm-hmm.
Allowing you to copy various GXs. It's probably, in my opinion, the most fun deck of all time.
Yeah, I think it is really good. And that's where like the Mewtwo VMAX is just like a pale comparison, right? Because it has such a limited set of
EV
cards.
Max.
Mew VMAX, sorry, yeah, because it has so few cards to copy from that it makes it very linear as to what it can do, which is opposed to the old Mewtwo and Mew went a lot of ways. And obviously you've messed around with Zoroark a good bit, which I haven't done, and that obviously lends itself to a toolbox going a lot of directions too.
Yeah, so I think toolbox decks are super cool. Obviously, Napoleon is not really a toolbox. You have, I guess, two
No.
options, kind of three, but yeah, I think like Mewtwo Mew is super awesome, and then Ditto toolbox with control. That's actually a really interesting deck.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they're like toolbox decks define a good format in my opinion. I think they're probably the most interesting deck, and I think pretty much everyone enjoys assuming that they're like decent.
I think it's good having them. I don't think it should be that everybody has to play a toolbox deck, though. I think more
No,
linear
no.
decks should be viable too, but that having toolbox is another choice, and makes things keeps everybody on their toes, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen. It can adjust to things easier.
Yeah, and I think a deck like Arceus Toolbox isn't a toolbox deck enough. I think you just need. And I think Pokemon that are designed to be toolbox, like Ditto, like Mewtwo Mew,
Hmm.
like Zoroark, are important for a format.
Yeah, I think it's good when they're there. They probably aren't always around though, to that extent, right? They're or
I
there
think
are
there's
always
usually
some.
there's usually something like that in the format,
Okay.
but sometimes you're just kind of bad.
Because at this point, there's the single price Zoroark is the toolbox, but it's been very
Yeah. Well, there's
difficult.
Zoroark, but Zoroark's been good at times. Ditto,
Hmm.
has been good at times, and then, I mean, there's like Regidraco VMAT or V Star, which is kind of toolboxy, but there are a ton of options.
Hmm.
Same thing with Mew VMAX, not that toolboxy, but very strong.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully, when you say Regidrago, V-Star, hopefully they keep making dragon type Pokemon, so it gets more options there.
Yeah, I think part of the idea of a toolbox deck with a lot of them is that you can use their various energy costs. With Regidraco, you have to use that energy cost, which isn't
Right,
as interesting because
right.
there's usually always a very clear best attack.
And then Lost Zone is a toolbox, right? You can use Mirage Gate to power up anything you want, so that opens up multi other types depending on
Yeah,
what the
yeah,
cost is.
yeah, and that's why I like it. With the Amazing Rares, it was kind of cool, and you could make an argument that Lugia Arcaps is also toolbox, but like
Yeah.
it was kind of obnoxious. Like the tools that you had in your toolbox were like you had like one attack that instantly KO'd their active, another attack that like wiped their whole board, and another attack that took extra prizes, and so like all the tools in the toolbox were just kind of obnoxious.
Right. So yeah, that definitely true. So I mean, it's Lugia Arcaps is in a better place now that it's been nerfed with the loss of the special energies in particular. I
Yeah.
think so.
But then, are there other specific points you want to talk about that you thought of?
Um, I mean, I guess we should talk about GLC some, right? Because that's probably the other format that gets the most discussion in general. And
Yeah.
I've not been a GLC person. Um, Obviously, it's a lot of effort to put together your 60 card list, right? Because you don't duplicate things, and I'm probably a little bit lazy for that. And then it's just a whole different set of cards you have to get to know. So unless you're going to make the commitment to get into GLC, it's you can't really play well unless you've taken the time to understand what all the other decks are playing in general.
Yeah. Also, I think if you've been following GLC or if you haven't, it's kind of like dying, especially with live
Hmm.
not having the full GLC and PTCGO also not having the full GLC. It's essentially impossible to play GLC. You can
Yeah.
play it in person, but it's really supposed to be an online format.
Yep.
Honestly, I definitely need to make a video about GLC. We'll just talk about like why it's kind of it unfortunately flopped. Oh, I got kicked out of PTGO. Um, speaking of flopped, but yeah, GLC unfortunately is on its way out. It does have some stuff. It's like fun to talk about, but it's becoming a thing of the past. Um, and I wonder if something will be there to replace it because we have like no formats. We just have standard. And that even a format like expanded, the second most supported format
Hmm.
is just awful. I think like I don't think there are any decks and expand I'd say are like good for the game.
Yeah, I mean, right. It certainly like on PTCG, there are a lot of donk decks, and to go, when you jump in and you just get, it's one turn and you've either won or lost the game. It's not fun from my standpoint if I'm not playing a donk deck. And there were some of the cards that you needed for the top decks were really expensive there. So it's in live it'll be more accessible if they ever get it working. Honestly, if they keep the expanded nerfed the way it is, shrunk, right, that might actually be a better format. I'm not sure. It might make it a little more interesting. Um, I'm not sure though.
Yeah, I think that's might be true. Where like Donk isn't as good. I don't even remember. Yeah, Donk just loses some of its like item cards, which it kind of needs. And then also, I feel like the issue like control is like super obnoxious. There's so many decks
Hmm.
that just stop you from playing the game almost completely.
Yeah.
Either you're playing some absurdly powerful deck, including Mad Party. Mad Party can definitely one shot anything turn one. Maybe not a tag team. But pretty much anything else you can one shot. You can definitely one
Yeah.
shot a V turn one.
Hmm.
And it's just so overpowered. And then you have decks there. I think the new. I haven't been following it that much either because now Expand is also like impossible to play. Um,
Yeah.
but there's the Dialga V-Star deck with Giratina and Garchomp Tag Team GX that just removed all your opponent's Pokemon from play, which
Hmm.
was kind of problematic because obviously like that's not good. So yeah, I think expanded is not a good format, and I've
Hmm.
seen some other formats popping up. I should probably make a tier list format, a format tier
The
list
format
video.
too. Yeah.
Someone actually asked. I think Ember Power asked for me to do that. So I
It,
might do that. Um, but
mhm.
yeah,
I wouldn't mind there being a constructed single prize format other than GLC. Something that was more like along the standards, but standard format, just single prize. And maybe with a couple bands if it was necessary. But it's fun to play single prize decks, right? And generally they're tough to play against all these multi-prize decks. So I think people would like that, the opportunity to play more single prize things. I don't know that
yeah,
Pokemon's ever going to provide the ability to do that because you want to be able to do it and not just have to not just do friend requests. Although that would be good too because we can't do friend requests for expanded type things. But if you could jump in the ladder against someone else with some alternate format deck on some rank ladder, I think Pokemon needs to provide that. And I'm not sure if they will with live, but I think they for the health of the game they're going to have to.
yeah, and I think that the last thing I have to say is, speaking of formats, I
Yep.
will be releasing, or I may have already released, a video about my random deck format, which, as I mentioned earlier, but it randomly generates a deck for you. It only right now uses cards from Scarlet and Violet, so and all single prizes as well. So it's kind of cool. It's obviously very easy. You don't need to make the deck. You do need to get to craft the cards if you don't already have them, but they should all be relatively cheap. So I'd recommend you like try
Hmm.
that out. I should have a link in. on my channel, I have like a video linking to the spreadsheet of all the lists, and just like go ahead and grab a random one off of that. But I think is that it?
I think we've covered things pretty well.
So yeah, we were obviously been the Reasonably Effective podcast, and I've been 10 Types.
And I'm Uncommon Fossil.
And remember, if you're watching on YouTube, check out our other channels, and also subscribe. That'd be really appreciated. And you can watch on Spotify, Apple, whatever, pretty much any podcast platform
Yes.
you can check us out on.
Mm-hmm.
But we hope you enjoyed, and we're excited to see you in the next episode.
Take care.